I remember that night like it was carved into my skin. The room was quiet, only the hum of the fan and the slow rhythm of his breathing beside me. My eyes stayed shut, but inside I was wide awake. I told myself to pretend, to stay still, to act asleep, because I wasn't ready to face what my heart already knew. But then, he moved closer. I felt his hand brush against mine, soft at first, like he was scared of his own feelings. And in that fragile silence, when I thought nothing could happen, he did something that left me frozen, and completely changed the way I saw him forever. The night felt heavier than usual, though nothing about the room had changed. The same ceiling fan turned lazily above us, humming in a rhythm I knew by heart. The window was cracked open just enough to let in a soft breeze, and the faint sound of crickets drifted in from the outside world. My body lay still under the covers, but my mind refused to rest. My chest rose and fell slowly, carefully measured, because I wanted him to believe I was asleep. I thought if I kept my eyes closed, if I kept my breathing even, I could shield myself from the truth I was afraid to face. But in that stillness, when everything else faded into silence, the weight of his presence beside me felt impossible to ignore. Every inch of me was awake, alive, and trembling with questions I had never dared to say out loud. His breathing was steady, but I could feel a difference in the way he shifted. He wasn't asleep either. I sensed it. I could hear the faint movement of the mattress, the creak that came whenever he turned toward me. My heart pounded in my chest so loud that I was terrified he would hear it. I told myself to stay still, to keep the act going, but then I felt it, his hand moving slowly, cautiously, like it was searching for courage. It hovered near mine, hesitated for what felt like forever, and then brushed against my fingers. The touch was so faint it could have been an accident, but I knew it wasn't. He lingered there too long, careful but deliberate, and in that moment the air in the room thickened with something unspoken. I fought with myself not to move, not to flinch, though every part of me burned with electricity. I was shocked, not because I didn't want it, but because I had always believed this would remain a secret buried inside me. I had spent so long convincing myself that the feelings I carried were one-sided, that he could never look at me the way I looked at him. And yet, here he was, close enough to reach, close enough to touch, breaking through the barrier I thought we would never cross. I kept my eyes closed, terrified that if I opened them, the moment would vanish. His hand rested fully on mine now, his thumb gently tracing along the side of my finger. It was such a small gesture, almost invisible to the world, but to me it felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. My stomach twisted with a mix of fear and longing. I couldn't understand how something so delicate could feel so overwhelming, how one touch could unravel years of silence I had built around my heart. He didn't say a word, but I could feel him leaning closer. His breath warmed the space between us, and I caught the faintest whisper of his scent, familiar yet suddenly intoxicating. My body stiffened, caught between wanting to pull away and wanting to fall into him completely. I thought of every time we had laughed together, every late-night conversation, every look that lingered just a second too long. All those memories came rushing back like puzzle pieces I had ignored, and for the first time, they all fit together. My chest ached with the weight of it. I wanted to reach for him, to let him know I wasn't asleep, that I wanted this too. But something inside me held back, chained down by fear. Fear of what would happen if I admitted it. Fear of what he might say if I broke the fragile moment too soon. So I lay there, still pretending, my heart tearing itself apart in silence. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand stay on mine, and then, so softly I almost thought I imagined it, he whispered something under his breath. The words were low, almost trembling, but I caught them. I wish I could tell you. My body froze, my breath nearly stopping. My mind raced with those words, replaying them over and over until they carved themselves into me. He didn't know I was listening. He didn't know I heard the secret he had let slip into the dark. And in that fragile moment, my world changed. All the walls I had built around myself cracked, and I realized that maybe I wasn't the only one hiding. Maybe he was fighting the same battle I was. My eyes stayed closed, but behind them tears were forming, pressing against the barrier of my lashes. I swallowed hard, steadying my breath so he wouldn't know I was awake. I didn't want to ruin it, not yet. For the first time, lying there in the quiet with his hand on mine and his voice echoing in my head, I felt both terrified and alive. The fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, but it was mixed now with something I had never allowed myself to feel so fully before, hope. It was such a dangerous word, hope. But in that room, with him beside me, it became the only thing I had left to hold on to. I stayed still even though every nerve in my body screamed at me to move. His words echoed in my head like a secret prayer I wasn't supposed to hear. I wish I could tell you. The sentence replayed again and again, each repetition digging deeper into me. My chest felt tight, and I struggled to keep my breathing steady so he wouldn't realize I was awake. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't calm the storm raging inside me. His hand still rested against mine, warm and trembling ever so slightly, as if he too was battling with himself. I wanted to squeeze his hand, to let him know I had heard him, that he didn't need to wish anymore because I was right here. But fear pinned me down harder than the weight of my own body. I wondered if he thought I was unreachable, if he believed that the truth would only push me away. The thought of him carrying this quietly all along made something break inside me. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to be afraid with me. I wanted to tell him I had been hiding too. But my lips stayed pressed together, sealed shut by doubt. The room was filled with silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was thick, alive, carrying everything unspoken between us. I heard his breathing shift, shaky now, almost unsteady, like he was caught between courage and fear. He let out a quiet sigh, one that sounded more like surrender than relief, and then his fingers curled around mine just enough to let me know this wasn't an accident anymore. The weight of that simple gesture made my whole body tremble beneath the blanket. I tried to stay calm, but inside, I was falling apart in the most beautiful and terrifying way. My mind wandered back to moments I had ignored before, the times he had looked at me with eyes that seemed to say more than his mouth ever could, the nights we stayed up talking until we were both too tired to keep our heads up, the way his laughter always lingered in my chest longer than anyone else's. Suddenly, all of it made sense. Those weren't just moments. They were pieces of something bigger, something we were both too scared to admit. Now, lying here with his hand holding mine in the dark, I realized I had been blind to the truth because I was too afraid to believe in it. He shifted closer, just slightly, but I felt every inch of it. His arm brushed against mine, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He was near enough that I could feel the rise and fall of his chest, hear the faint tremble in his breath. I thought he might say something else, but instead he stayed quiet, as if even whispering would shatter the fragile space we had created. That silence was louder than any confession, and it filled me with both comfort and longing. I wanted so badly to open my eyes, to turn to him, to whisper back that he didn't need to be afraid. But the fear of breaking the moment kept me locked in place. I wondered if he thought I was too far away, even though I was right there beside him. The thought of him believing he was alone in this broke me. I felt tears slipping silently from the corners of my eyes, sliding down into the pillow where they disappeared without sound. They weren't tears of sadness, not completely. They were tears of release, of relief, of realizing that maybe all this time, I wasn't the only one carrying this heavy secret. The clock on the wall ticked faintly, each second stretching longer than the last. Every heartbeat felt like it could give me away. I didn't know how long we stayed like that, his hand holding mine, our bodies close but not yet intertwined, our hearts racing in the quiet. It felt endless and fleeting all at once. I kept wondering if this was real or if I was caught in some dream where everything I wanted was finally reaching for me. And then, just when I thought he might pull away, his thumb brushed against my skin again, softer this time, more deliberate. It was as if he was gathering strength from the small connection, as if that tiny touch was the only way he could speak the words he couldn't say out loud. I bit down gently on my lip, swallowing the gasp that threatened to escape me. My whole body shook under the weight of what was happening. I had never felt so exposed, even though my eyes were closed and I hadn't moved a muscle. It was like he could see through every layer I had built to protect myself. The silence stretched on, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like we were standing on the edge of something bigger, something waiting to be uncovered. I had no idea where this would lead us, but for the first time, I wasn't just afraid. I was hopeful. And that hope terrified me more than anything else, because it meant I had something real to lose. The longer I lay there pretending to sleep, the harder it became to keep my body still. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it might shake the mattress. His hand was still resting against mine, his thumb making slow, uncertain movements that felt both intentional and fragile, as if he was speaking without words. I kept wondering what was happening inside his head. Did he know what he was doing to me? Did he realize that each touch was breaking down the walls I had built to protect myself? I tried to convince myself to stay calm, but it was impossible when every fiber of me was burning with the weight of his closeness. His breathing was uneven now, like he was struggling with something he wanted to say. I waited, holding my breath, listening to the quiet rise and fall of his chest. And then, so softly I almost missed it, I heard him whisper again. This time the words were clear, trembling but honest. I can't stop thinking about you. My whole body froze. It felt like time had stopped, like the world outside had disappeared and only this room existed. I had dreamt of hearing those words, imagined them 1,000 times, but never believed they would come from his lips. My eyes stung with fresh tears, and I had to bite down on my lip to stop myself from gasping. He didn't know I was awake. He didn't know that every word was carving itself into me, filling the empty spaces I had carried for so long. I wanted to turn to him, to open my eyes, to tell him I felt the same. But the fear of shattering this fragile truth kept me frozen. I could feel the rawness in his voice, the weight of his confession, and I realized he was just as scared as I was. For the first time, I saw him not as untouchable, not as someone I could never have, but as someone vulnerable, someone human, someone who had been hiding too. The silence after his words was unbearable, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with meaning, with all the things we had both kept inside. I wondered how long he had been carrying this. How many times had he almost said it but stopped himself? How many nights had he lain awake beside me, wanting to reach out but never daring to? The thought made my chest ache. I wasn't alone in this. He had been walking the same tightrope of fear and longing. I realized then that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, hidden in the smallest gestures, tucked away in the pauses between words. His quiet confession meant more to me than any grand declaration ever could. I felt his body shift slightly, as if he had turned his face toward me. The warmth of his breath tickled the back of my neck, and I could sense how close he was, close enough that if I rolled over, our eyes would meet. My fingers twitched against his, but I kept them still, terrified that even the smallest movement would betray me. He let out another sigh, softer this time, almost like he was releasing something he had held in for too long. "If only you knew," he whispered, and my heart nearly stopped. My chest rose and fell unevenly, and I prayed he didn't notice. The truth was, I did know. I knew because I had felt it too, because I had been drowning in the same silence, because my soul had been calling out for him in ways I could never admit. My mind raced with memories, the first time I realized I was drawn to him, the laughter we had shared that lingered long after the sound faded, the way he made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake wondering if I was broken, wondering why I wanted something I couldn't speak of, and how his presence had been the only thing that kept me from falling apart. And now, here he was, whispering the words I had needed all along, words I never believed I would hear. My tears kept flowing, but silently, slipping into the pillow without a sound. I wished I could gather the courage to turn to him, to meet his eyes, to tell him he wasn't alone anymore. But my fear was a chain I hadn't yet broken. I told myself I needed more time, that this fragile moment couldn't be rushed. Yet deep inside, I knew that nothing would ever be the same after this night. The air between us felt different now, charged with something we could no longer ignore. I stayed there with my eyes closed, letting his words echo through me, letting the warmth of his hand anchor me to the truth I had been too afraid to believe. In the quiet darkness, I finally understood that love had been here all along, waiting for us to find the courage to see it. The darkness wrapped around us like a secret, and I felt myself sinking deeper into the weight of his words. "If only you knew." Those 4 syllables kept repeating in my mind, over and over, until they felt like they were stitched into me. I had never heard his voice sound like that before, so raw, so stripped of all the laughter and confidence he usually carried. There was something in it that told me he had been holding this in for far too long, and tonight it had slipped through the cracks. I wanted to break the silence between us, to tell him I did know, to admit that I had been carrying the same secret, but the fear of what would happen next kept my eyes sealed shut. It was easier to pretend I was asleep than to face the truth head-on, easier to stay in this fragile place where nothing had been risked yet, where nothing had been lost. But every second that passed made it harder to stay still. My chest rose unevenly, betraying me, and I was terrified he would notice. My hand, pressed against his, felt like it was trembling on its own. I tried to steady myself, but the storm inside me was too strong. I thought about all the times I had hidden, all the years I had buried my feelings so deep that even I had begun to believe they didn't exist. I had told myself it was safer this way, safer to live in silence than to risk rejection or shame. But hearing his voice, knowing he was carrying the same weight, shattered every excuse I had ever used to protect myself. Love was here, sitting beside me, touching me, whispering into the dark, and I was still pretending to sleep. The guilt of it cut through me, but so did the fear. I asked myself what would happen if I opened my eyes. Would he pull away? Would he panic? Would he deny what he had just said? The thought of losing him, of ruining what we had, scared me more than anything. I couldn't imagine a world without him in it, and the risk of breaking this delicate balance felt unbearable. Still, I could feel him fighting his own battle beside me. His breath was shallow now, his chest rising and falling in uneven patterns. He shifted slightly, and the mattress dipped with his weight as he moved closer, his body pressing lightly against mine through the blanket. His warmth seeped into me, and it was like my skin was on fire, every nerve awake and alive. My heart raced so violently I thought it might give me away, but he didn't move away. Instead, he stayed there, close enough that I could almost hear the pounding of his own heartbeat. In that closeness, something inside me shifted. For so long I had believed love was something distant, unreachable, something I wasn't allowed to touch. But now it was here, real and fragile and human, and I realized I had been wrong. I wasn't unlovable. I wasn't invisible. I was right here, being held in ways I had only dreamed of. Tears slipped down my face again, soaking the pillow, but I didn't move to wipe them away. They were quiet tears, born from the release of finally seeing what had been hidden for so long. I thought about the outside world, about the people who wouldn't understand, about the fear that had chained me down all these years. But in this room, in this moment, none of that mattered. The world outside might judge, it might try to tear us apart, but lying here with him, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt safe. His hand tightened just slightly around mine, almost as if he sensed my silent struggle. That small pressure, gentle yet steady, told me everything he couldn't say out loud. It was a promise in its own way, a vow whispered through touch. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell him I loved him too, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by fear and hope all tangled together. So I stayed there, pretending, but inside I was unraveling. Every moment was carving deeper into me, every breath between us pulling me closer to a truth I could no longer deny. I realized that I couldn't keep this hidden forever. Sooner or later, one of us would have to break the silence. And when that moment came, nothing would ever be the same again. The night seemed endless, stretching on as if time itself was holding its breath for us. I lay there still pretending, though my body betrayed me in every possible way. My chest rose unevenly, my fingers twitched against his, and the tears I had tried to hide left faint traces against the pillow. I kept telling myself to stay in control, but how could I, when every second with his hand resting over mine felt like the very air around us was vibrating with meaning? He hadn't let go. That was the part one couldn't stop thinking about. He hadn't pulled away, not once, as if holding me, even in this uncertain, fragile way, was the only thing grounding him. It was more than just a touch. It was a declaration he hadn't spoken out loud, but one I could feel in every corner of my being. My heart ached, not from pain but from the overwhelming realization that what I had longed for all this time was right here within reach. Still, the fear loomed heavy. I thought about what it would mean if I admitted it, if I turned toward him and opened my eyes. I thought about the people outside this room, the friends who laughed with us during the day but might never understand what this connection meant. I thought about family, about the weight of expectations, about the shame that had been whispered into me since I was young. Could we survive all of that? Would love be strong enough to stand against a world that often seemed determined to crush it? The questions clawed at me, but each time I considered them, the warmth of his hand and the sound of his quiet breathing beside me pulled me back to this moment. Maybe the outside world didn't matter. Maybe all that mattered was here, now, between us. He shifted again, the mattress dipping slightly as his body pressed even closer. I could feel the heat radiating from him, seeping into me like sunlight I hadn't felt in years. His breath brushed against my neck, sending shivers through me, and I realized he wasn't trying to hide anymore. He wanted to be near me, even if he couldn't say it aloud. That thought filled me with both joy and sorrow, joy that I wasn't alone, sorrow that we still couldn't face it openly. My mind wandered back to small moments I had ignored before, the way he always lingered when we said goodbye, the way his laughter seemed softer when it was just the two of us, the way he looked at me sometimes like I was the only person in the room. All those pieces came together now, forming a picture I had been too afraid to see. He had been there all along, waiting in silence, carrying the same weight I had carried. I wasn't the only one hiding. The tears came harder now, slipping faster down my face, and I buried them into the pillow so he wouldn't hear. But even as I cried, there was a strange kind of peace settling over me. For so long I had believed my feelings were a curse, something to bury and deny. But lying here beside him, his hand in mine, I realized they were something else entirely. They were a gift, fragile but powerful, something that had survived despite all the fear and silence. I felt his thumb brush against my hand again, slow and careful, and it sent another wave of heat through me. It was like he was reminding me he was there, that I wasn't imagining any of this. My heart swelled with the urge to respond, to move my fingers just enough to let him know I was awake, that I was here with him in this. But the fear chained me down once more. What if he panicked? What if he pulled away? I couldn't bear the thought of losing this, of losing him, even if all I could have for now was this quiet, hidden closeness. So I stayed frozen, letting the moment stretch on, letting his touch speak for both of us. Outside, the world was sleeping, unaware of the storm inside this small room. But in here, something was changing. Something fragile and beautiful was taking root in the silence, something that neither of us could keep buried forever. The night pressed on, heavy and endless, yet every second felt sharper than the last. I could no longer tell how long we had been lying there, tangled in silence, but the weight of it was unlike anything I had ever known. His hand was still on mine, his thumb tracing lazy, hesitant lines across my skin as though he was drawing words he couldn't yet speak. Each small movement carved deeper into me, filling cracks I didn't even realize were there. I wanted to give in, to turn toward him and let the truth spill out, but fear had me rooted in place. The thought of losing him, of breaking this delicate connection by moving too fast, was stronger than any impulse to act. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Hope. It terrified me, but it was there, beating against my ribs with every touch of his thumb. I wondered what he was thinking. Was he aware of the effect he had on me, or was he trapped in his own storm of doubts? His breathing had grown softer, slower, almost like he was trying to calm himself, but there was a quiver in it that betrayed how hard he was fighting. The room was thick with everything unspoken, and it felt like we were both standing on the edge of something vast and irreversible. Then, from somewhere outside, a sudden noise shattered the stillness, a door slamming, voices faint in the distance. My body stiffened instantly, panic flooding through me as the reality of the world beyond our walls returned like a cruel reminder. I thought of what would happen if someone walked in, if this fragile truth were exposed before we were ready. Fear gripped me so tightly I could barely breathe, but then his hand squeezed mine, firm and steady. That small act silenced the chaos inside me more than anything else could have. It was like he was telling me without words, I'm here. Don't be afraid. My chest ached at the simplicity of it, because I had spent so long drowning in fear that I had forgotten what it felt like to be steadied by someone else's strength. I let his warmth anchor me, and slowly the panic ebbed away, leaving behind a fragile calm. The voices outside faded, and the quiet returned, heavier now but also more certain. He hadn't pulled away when the world threatened to intrude. He had held on tighter. That realization burned in my chest like a secret flame. I could feel him shift slightly closer, his body brushing against mine under the blanket, and the nearness of him sent a tremor through me. My tears had dried, but my eyes still stung with the weight of everything building between us. I thought about how unfair it was that we had to hide like this, that love, something so natural and pure, had to be smothered under layers of fear and silence. Yet in this room, in this quiet moment, it felt like the world outside couldn't touch us. Here, we could exist without judgment, even if only for a few stolen hours. I wanted to hold on to that feeling forever. My mind kept racing back to the small things that had led us here. The laughter, the stolen glances, the comfort of his presence on nights when the world felt too heavy. They had all been pieces of a puzzle I hadn't dared to complete. But tonight, the picture was forming clearly in front of me, and it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Love was here, real and fragile and within reach, and I realized I didn't want to spend another night pretending it wasn't. My hand twitched against his, the smallest movement, almost involuntary. For a moment I panicked, thinking I had given myself away, but he didn't flinch. Instead, his thumb brushed across my skin again, slower this time, almost tender, and it felt like an answer to the question I hadn't dared to ask. My body trembled, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the overwhelming truth that we were already speaking to each other, even without words, even without eyes meeting. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was alive. And though neither of us had said it aloud yet, I knew. I knew because I could feel it in the way he held my hand tighter when the world outside tried to intrude, in the way his touch lingered like he was afraid to let go. Love was here, and it was no longer something I could pretend to ignore. The night had begun to feel endless, as if time itself had been stretched thin to make room for the silence between us. I was still pretending to sleep, but inside my heart was louder than the ticking clock on the wall. His hand had never left mine, and each small stroke of his thumb seemed to speak 1,000 things we hadn't dared to say. I wondered how he could be so close and still not realize I was awake, but maybe he did know and chose not to break the fragile magic we had built in the dark. My chest was heavy with words begging to be spoken, yet I kept them buried, afraid that even one syllable might push him away. The air in the room was thick, not just with silence but with something deeper, a kind of unspoken truth that wrapped itself around us like a blanket. I could feel him shift again, closer this time, until his arm brushed lightly against mine and stayed there. The warmth of him seeped through the thin fabric between us, and it was like my entire body caught fire. My throat tightened with the urge to finally turn, to finally look at him, but I stayed frozen, my body trapped between fear and desire. Then his voice came again, soft and almost trembling, as though he was speaking to himself more than to me. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words hit me like a storm, powerful and unstoppable. I felt them crash against every part of me I had spent years trying to keep guarded. Tears welled up again, hot and insistent, slipping silently down my face. I wanted to scream that I felt the same, that he wasn't alone in this, that I couldn't imagine a world without him either. But my lips stayed sealed, my body still clinging to the safety of pretending. He let out a long, shaky breath, and I could almost feel the weight of it leaving him. There was a rawness to the way he spoke that stripped away every wall I had ever seen him put up in front of others. In that moment, he wasn't the strong, confident person everyone else knew. He was vulnerable, fragile, and human, and I loved him even more for it. His hand tightened around mine, not forcefully but with a quiet desperation, as if he was afraid I might slip away even in sleep. That small gesture told me more than any confession ever could. It was him saying, "Stay. Don't leave. You matter to me," without needing to form the words. My body trembled with the weight of everything I was holding inside. I thought back to the first time I realized I loved him, the way it had scared me so much that I buried it deep, convincing myself it was nothing more than a passing feeling. But here, now, with him beside me and his voice laying bare the truth, I could no longer pretend. Love had been there all along, in every shared laugh, every late-night conversation, every look that lingered too long. And it was here now, undeniable, breathing between us in the quiet. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like if I opened my eyes right now, if I turned to face him and finally said the words I had been holding back. I imagined his face, the softness in his eyes, the way his hand might hold mine even tighter. The thought filled me with both joy and terror. I wanted it so badly, yet the fear of breaking the delicate thread that connected us kept me paralyzed. Still, something had shifted. His words had cut through the silence, and even though I hadn't answered yet, I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever. The truth was alive now, between us, and no matter how much we tried to hide, it wouldn't let us go. I felt his breath steady against my skin, and though I couldn't see his face, I knew he was staring at me, maybe wondering what it would take for him to finally be brave enough to wake me, or what it would take for me to finally open my eyes. The night held its breath with us, and in that fragile, endless silence, love grew stronger, weaving itself tighter around our hearts, daring us both to stop hiding. Morning arrived slowly, creeping into the room with soft streaks of light that slipped through the thin curtains. The world outside was waking, but inside I still clung to the darkness of the night, to the fragile cocoon of silence we had spun around ourselves. His hand was still holding mine, though looser now, as if somewhere between exhaustion and peace he had drifted into a light sleep. I lay there with my eyes closed, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine, realizing I could no longer pretend. The hours of the night had broken me open, and every word he had whispered was etched into me forever. My heart ached with the need to let him know that he wasn't alone, that everything he had feared to say out loud had already been living inside me all this time. The fear was still there, gnawing at me, warning me that if I moved, if I spoke, everything could crumble. But another part of me, the part that had been quiet and hidden for so long, was louder now. That part told me that love wasn't meant to stay buried. Love wanted to breathe, to be seen, to be lived. And I couldn't let him keep thinking his feelings were one-sided, not after everything he had confessed into the darkness. Slowly, carefully, I shifted my fingers, curling them into his hand instead of leaving them limp. His grip tightened instantly, almost reflexively, as though he had been waiting for me all along. My chest tightened, and tears blurred my vision even before I opened my eyes. I turned my head slightly on the pillow, and when my eyes finally blinked open, the first thing I saw was his face. He wasn't asleep after all. His eyes were already open, watching me with a mixture of fear and tenderness that made my heart feel like it would break. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared, two souls caught in the realization that the silence between us had finally ended. His lips parted, as if he wanted to speak but didn't know how. I felt the weight of his uncertainty, the years of hiding pressing down on him, and before he could say anything, I whispered, "I heard you." His breath caught, his eyes widening, and for a second I thought he might pull away. But then something shifted in his expression, fear giving way to relief, hesitation melting into a fragile kind of joy. My voice shook as I continued, tears sliding down my face freely now. "Everything you said last night. I heard it all. And I feel the same. I've always felt the same." The words tumbled out of me, clumsy and raw, but they were truer than anything I had ever spoken. His hand tightened around mine with a desperation that told me he had been waiting years to hear those words. His face softened, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. For the first time, we weren't hiding anymore. He shifted closer, so close that our foreheads touched, and in that closeness, in the warmth of his breath mingling with mine, the world outside ceased to matter. I could still hear the faint sounds of morning, birds singing, distant cars, the hum of life carrying on, but in that moment, all I knew was him. He whispered my name like it was a prayer, his voice breaking under the weight of everything he had carried. "I thought I'd lose you if you knew." My chest clenched, and I shook my head, pressing my hand harder into his. "No. You never lost me. You never could." The tears finally spilled from his eyes then, and seeing them broke me in ways I hadn't expected. All the pain of hiding, all the years of silence, all the fear that had kept us apart melted in those tears, and what remained was something pure, something fragile but unbreakable. Love. Not the kind written in stories or shouted for the world to see, but the quiet, enduring kind that survives even in the dark. We stayed there in silence, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of knowing, of finally being seen. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me into him, and I let myself sink into that embrace fully, without hesitation for the first time. I felt his heartbeat against mine, steady and strong, and I knew we were no longer two people pretending. We were one truth finally spoken. The world outside would still be hard. People would still judge, whispers would still follow us, and fear would still try to creep in. But lying there in his arms, I realized that none of that could erase this moment. None of it could undo what had been revealed in the dark. Love was here, alive and real, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to run from it. I wanted to hold on to it, to fight for it, to let it grow despite everything. As the light filled the room and morning took over the night, I closed my eyes again, not to hide this time, but to feel him closer, to let the truth settle into me completely. I wasn't pretending anymore. Neither of us were. And that was the most beautiful beginning I could have ever imagined.